All right. So last week we talked about building our rhythm of our week around rest. We talked about the fact that God is the God who created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, called it good, but he knew when to stop creating. And then we talked about organizing your week, your calendar, around your faith and making attending and being a part of engaging the church a big part of it. So last week we looked at this verse. I'm going to leave it up on screen for a few, but I'm going to tell a story that literally just happened. Actually, Kesmet on two things. One is I didn't know I was wearing this shirt underneath, and this is one of the pieces we're going to talk about today, is communal aspect of our faith. And the other was I talked with one of our guys who, when I was in Ohio, I did what I'm going to be teaching you guys over the course of this latter part of the experience, is that discipleship is not just you consuming and figuring something out. It's not actually discipleship until you are discipling somebody else. And so when I was in Ohio, the very first person that the senior pastor connected me with was a guy named Kyle. And Kyle was a volunteer at the church. He was involved in a number of different things. And he and I started doing just morning workouts. So we'd see each other 3 or 4 times a week while we were working out. We'd see each other at church. And he did all of our graphics for the church. We'd talk through different things like that. He became one of my key leaders for life groups, because that was one of my roles. Was the church at the time had about 50 life groups that met, and I oversaw all of those. So Kyle kind of helped with that. And then when I left and they kind of restructured the role that I had, it ended up going to Kyle. So I was like, this is fantastic. So I was talking with Kyle on my way back here from the lab today, and just talking about man, how are things going? And he's like, man, it's good, but everything we do funnels into Sunday, and I'm trying to get our people connected into groups. And so we're going to talk about something, because last week, if I triggered any shame response or guilt response in anybody, you might have taken the wrong message away, that I was saying you have to prioritize being at church on Sunday, and if you don't do that, you're a bad Christian. Remember, we said we're not talking about the religious aspect of this. What we're talking about is that being still and knowing that he is God. Part of that means that we take a day to stop creating, to stop seeing the world in our image, and we trust him to be in charge. And historically, throughout time, from our Jewish roots to the early church and throughout the last 2,000 years of Christian history, that anchor piece has been the Sunday, or in Jewish faith, Saturday worship experience. So we talked about this verse last week. I want to read it again to you. It's out of the book of Acts, chapter 2, verse 42 and 46. It says, they devoted themselves, and remember we talked about that word devoted. What does that mean? They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings, to the apostles' teaching of fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Every day they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple, so your church-like place. Again, it's not a building, it's a people, it's a gathering of the body. And they broke bread from house to house. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings, and they broke bread from house to house. So I want to talk about another piece of our weekly rhythm, which is the small group gathering, whatever you want to call them. We call them life groups currently. Spoilers, I'm looking, since we've kind of adapted some of our language in August when we talk about our vision series, we might change the name to growth groups. But whatever you call them, it really doesn't matter. It is that gathering together of like-minded, or even maybe some of you aren't fully like-minded around, discussing and walking through your faith. And so here's what Kyle and I kind of talked about, is that a lot of people in the era where going to church was just the thing you did, went to church, heard a sermon. There wasn't Facebook back then, so we wouldn't call it this, but nowadays we'd call it hitting the like button, and then put it on the shelf, walked away for a week, and came back the next week. And if something really impressed or was said really well, somebody would come up to the preacher and go, "Oh, it was a great message, preacher. Oh man, I'm really, really going to be thinking about that all week." And then you step out the door. And there's this magical bibbity-bobbity-boo that happens where your stomach starts talking to you, and then all the things that you left behind, you're like, "Oh, I'm freeing this, I'm giving it to Jesus," and then all of a sudden Sunday at 1, all of it starts yakking at you again. The dishes that are sitting in the sink, all the stuff you didn't get done for work, all the communications you didn't make with this person or that person, and you just kind of set it aside. And so if that is your weekly rhythm of only engaging in church, but not actually walking away from it as a gathering with the body that led to a deepening experience, it's no wonder why our faith doesn't go deeper. We were just having a conversation before here that Bob said the phrase, "In many ways, Denver is a mile wide." Get it? Mile wide, not mile high, but an inch deep. And that's often what happens in our faith. Like we write something down in the Sunday notebook and go, "Oh, that was so good. I'm going to let that change my life." And then 6-7 weeks later, you find it in your car seat and you're like, "What is this? Oh yeah, I was going to do that, huh?" And then that's the next thing. That's why, this isn't in your book anywhere, but it's a fantastic resource. It's Ted Decker, and the book is called The Slumber of Christianity. If you are a fan of Stephen King-esque novels, Ted Decker is a faith-based author, but his books are very mentally challenging. They're like deep. They have those big twists. They're about some sci-fi elements. Some are even kind of horror-esque elements. But they're really intellectually fun books. And so if you're interested in his, it's usually one of his books, especially when he was in his prime, because all of his books were one-word titles. So his best books are Blink, 3, Red, White. They just kind of go with that. And then later on, he started adding some additional ones in the mix. But about 20 years ago, he stepped, for just a moment away from writing the fiction, away from writing the novels, and wrote a book about heaven and about how we should be consumed by the notion of what God is doing. And on page 9 in the introduction, he says this. He says, "Christians aren't really so different from non-Christians. Certainly not on the scale you would expect, considering the promises of love, joy, and peace boldly pronounced from thousands of pulpits across the land. We spend our money on the same kinds of entertainment. We buy the same kinds of food and clothes. We spend as much time searching for purpose. Don't misunderstand me. There are exceptions. There are communities of thriving disciples all over the world who are burning with passion for Christ and filled with joy for their lot in life, pleased to be given yet one more day to sing of their Redeemer's mercy. There are those people who groan inwardly for the day they will meet their Creator face to face. But on the whole, Christianity has failed to satisfactorily respond to the glaring observation that Christians, despite a tendency to describe themselves as happy, are in practice no more happy than non-Christians. Our answer has become predictable. Seek more, sin less, and have faith. Then you will find happiness in your marriage and on earth." Most Christians have followed this mantra in spurts, yet they end up dissatisfied with the results. Their marriages still fail, their jobs are still downsized, their cars still break down, their health still wanes. The truth is, this life is powerless to satisfy our dreams of great happiness and pleasure. These dreams can only be satisfied in a mind-bending reality that awaits us. As long as Christians are asleep in this reality, they will search in vain for any lasting fulfillment. So, think about this. 52 Sundays a year, if you come every week, 52 hours of your life in a year, give or take, that you spend hearing God's word proclaimed from a pulpit, worshiping together, and walk away. 52 hours. How many of you work that in an average work week? Or more, right? So on an average work week or two, you are spent more time with the people you work with, invested in more by your managers, and etc., than you ever could if simply attending a service is all we're doing. So again, I'm not undoing last week's message. I'm building on it to say, if you look at the habit in the book of Acts, you see the early church devoted themselves. It wasn't something that they did once a week and walked away. It was something that reorganized the rest of their walk, the rest of their week. And again, this isn't about perfection, it's about direction. But when you start to stack the numbers, how many would willingly admit that they probably watch more Netflix in an average month than they probably would be at church in an average year? If 52 were the number, 52 hours, how many people go home and watch Netflix for 3-4 hours? How many people are on TikTok for 2, 3, 4 hours a day? So it's not a matter of, hey, you should be doing this Christian thing more. It's the reality that we're being poured into by so many other things, that if the sum total of your faith is simply, I went to church on Sunday, you're just not even tapping the gas. You're barely topping it off. And so we need a rhythm that speaks into more than just, oh, I heard something good this week. So the small group gathering from the last 2,000 years of Christian history has always been a part of that conversation. Now, across the years, there's different words for it. John Wesley famously started what he called Methodist societies, those who followed the method, which was, and I've mentioned this before, but it was essentially the small group gathering, except for the rule with the method was, if you didn't attend church that week, you did not come to the method. You did not come to that gathering, period. It was a little hardcore, but you know, how many churches got started? How many people were discipled? You know, there was a high bar, but they walked with it. There, through the years, we did what we called life groups, and that's what we've called ours for the last 10 years since I've been here, because the phrase doing life together really became that mantra for people. Oh, we're doing life together. And then, you know, it's been 6 years, but COVID happened. And while we've gone back and forgotten it, we also don't realize how that, plus the combination of a number of different technologies, social media, and things like that, have actually made us a far less social culture. One pastor pointed out years and years ago, even before the pandemic and before social media was even that big of a thing, he said, when I really think about it, I have not met my neighbors and I have lived in my house for X number of years, because I get out, I get into my car, which is in my driveway, I go out of in my garage. I go out of my garage into my driveway. I drive past all of my neighbors' houses. I go to work. I drive back. I go into my garage, and then I am done for the day. I never see my community, the ones that are right next door. And to be honest, that convicted me, but not enough to change my habits or patterns. You know, I the other day, a couple weeks ago, we were talking about our neighbors. And I saw Ted, and I was like, hey, Ted, how are you doing? Man, I haven't seen you in a while. How's the missus? And he goes, oh, she died. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. When did this happen? Oh, about 2 years ago. Oh my gosh. And there I'm just standing there, I'm like, I am a horrible human being. I am so sorry. Like, he goes, no, no, no. Like, I mean, it's not like we hung out all the time anyway, but the fact that that level of life-changing thing happened and I was completely oblivious for almost 2 years, that convicted me. And I get it. Because when I asked you guys who, works 50, 60, 70 hours a week, like, in Denver at least, that's what you got to do just to get by. Like, it used to be the norm that a single family household could have, typically the guy, but one person who worked full time, and then the wife and kids usually got to stay home. Wife worked from home, and you could afford a beach house, if your job was a little bit decent. Now in Denver alone, they say it takes 2.5 full-time salaries for any family to basically make it here. So it's not like this is a shame, 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 how dare you. There's a lot of competing agendas, but if our faith is going to be that rock that really shapes us, we do have to at least put on the scale how much of our life is shaped by Jesus versus Netflix, versus our job, versus TikTok, versus romance novels. I'm not picking on anybody if they read those things. They're just versus, like, I don't know, what's your thing? Westerns, or versus bowling, or versus, what's that thing that if you just weighed it on a scale, you were like, oh man, I really just show up. But God has so much more than that for us. When I was in college, there was this book that we were required to read. It's a theological discourse on God creating us for community. It was called Created for Community by Stanley J. Grenz. And I remember the name more than I even remember half the content of the book, because it was so pushed by one of our favorite professors that back before, like, you could print shirts on your own like this, a bunch of the students got together and created t-shirts that said, "Friends don't let friends read Grenz," because you were required to read it in every one of his classes. So, it became a joke. But ironically or not, even just the very title speaks to something. We are created for community. Think about, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. He made mankind. And remember that little revelation we did like week 3 of this group? We said, where God says, let us make mankind in our own image. God has eternally existed in community. And part of what he intends for us in our faith walk is not simply to just hear something on Sunday that we go, oh, that's a good soundbite, let me tweet that, X that, whatever the word is now that what do you do when you send something on X? Is it still called tweeting? Let me put it on Blue Sky and Snapchat and TikTok, whatever it is. But basically where we take a picture of the screen, go, oh, that's good, sent to all my friends, and then we're done with it for the rest of the week, right? What the early disciples did is they not only took what the disciples were teaching, the apostles were teaching, but they literally sat around a table together and ate and talked about it and wrestled with it. And if nothing else, I think that's the biggest part of it, is taking that time to wrestle with something. Andy Stanley used to talk about the difference in life groups or discipleship groups, whatever we want to call them right now, versus the Sunday gathering. And it's very interesting. And you'll notice me talk about it when we go to shift from this moment to group time. Bob's group actually always has the advantage because his room is set up for this where mine isn't. Andy Stanley would talk about rows versus circles. Because in rows, you are all right now oriented to look at me and listen to what I'm saying, which is awesome. Thank you for that. And we orient the class around this idea that you're going to listen for a little bit, but then circles. Circle gets the square, because when you're in a circle, you can look at each other. You can have that deeper conversation. You can question something. You can wrestle with something. You can say, hey, is anybody else seeing this? Because I just don't know if I'm getting this. Where in a typical row or a monologue type setup, you can't as much. Maybe you have a thought, but then you're like, well, I don't want to interrupt or anything and do if you need to. But that's the advantage of why we do this group in both parts, do this class, I should say, in both parts. There's the monologue, but then there's the dialogue. And quite honestly, the dialogue is the most important part. Because if I asked you, hey, what did I say on the third week of this experience that really stood out to you? You'd be like, there was something, I'm sure. Now I feel bad. But if I said, hey, what stood out to you in group conversation? I bet you could go, oh man, I watched as Thomas is here. I'm gonna pick on him. I watched as he took the lead that one night, and he was digging into it, or as Jono shared this thing, or as Lisa said this thing, or maybe Denya that was that insight, and I just hadn't thought about that, and then we talked about it. Modern society today, we don't live on our front porch. Some of you remember a day where at the end of the day, you sat at the front porch, you said hi to your neighbors, you talked about what was going on in life. We don't do that, ever. The closest approximation is social media, and it's a terrible front porch. That front porch is always on fire, by the way. Always. Just saying. So life in groups, whether we call them growth groups, discipleship classes, Sunday school, whatever you want to call them, it doesn't matter. Having that little bit of time that you not only take what was said on a Sunday sermon or in an experience like this, but then dialogue about it, it does some healing things for your soul. Because first of all, and I hope I made it clear, doubts are welcome here, questions are welcome here. When someone is brave enough to go, you know what, Pastor, I see what you're saying with that. I just don't know if I agree. That frees someone else up in the room to go, okay, I'm not the only one. Pastor, that was great when you said, I just don't know if I understand it. I don't know if I'm ready for it. That frees somebody else to go, okay, I'm safe here. We can work on this together. So rows are important. There's a reason why classrooms exist, right? But with every row needs to come a circle. There needs to come a conversation. When I was in Ohio, my senior pastor hired me to be the discipleship pastor, and I was to oversee groups and all that kind of stuff I've mentioned. But he was so serious about it. It was his vision. I was the one executing it. That's why it worked, because it wasn't me fighting to get us to make discipleship a part of the church. This was like, Lee, I hired you because you and I are lockstep. Let's go. And he said something from the stage pretty regularly. He would say, look, if you have to choose between coming on Sunday morning or being in your life group, you choose your life group every single time. And I so appreciated that. Now, being honest, the fallout of that was we had some people who didn't have to choose, but use that as an excuse to just never come to church then. And I talked to one of my friends who was in my life group, and I was like, hey, why aren't you there on Sunday? Oh, Pastor Paul said, if we have to choose, just go to the life group. So I'm just doing the life group. And I was like, yeah, but he said, if you have to, because her problem was she didn't like other people in the church, and in the group, everybody liked her. And so she didn't have to experience what we talked about last week, where a part of the joy of the gathered body of the church is that not everybody sees things the same way you do. You might sit on a different political spectrum. You might disagree with how someone parents their child. You might see a person who's a little more introverted or a little more extroverted. You need that. That's what the Bible calls iron sharpening iron, where you rough off those edges. However, you also need to be able to sit down with someone or someones, typically in a small group. I've got math on it if you'd like to see it in another place. No more than 12 people, give or take. Anything more than 12 people, and you're still in a small church. You're not in a small group, right? But you need that small, whether it's 2, 3, or 10, you need that small group conversation on a regular basis. And I know it's just not popular right now. Like, ironically, of all things, gathering in groups in discussion is not popular. And yet, we'll go on forums and, I'm on the Star Trek fandom forum and I hate this thing. And I'm talking, we'll do that for hours and hours and hours, but not look someone in the eyes and say, talk to me about this whole whatever. Pick your favorite topic. 6-day creation, the book of Revelation, like, should you do this? Should you do, like, whatever it is. Like, we used to be able to sit down with people that we disagreed with even and just talk. Sipping sweet tea on the front porch, if you're from the South, I guess, right? That's what the small group gathering is meant to be. It's meant to be a place where we grow together, where we grow in community. Because the reality is we're created for community. So I'm going to start laying down some things that are not expectations. They're not shame moments. They're not anything. They're just like little nuggets of, hey, if you're really digging into what's happening in this experience, let me share some thoughts with you. One of them is, no one who comes into this church on Sunday should come in alone and leave alone. Should come in unnoticed and leave unnoticed. That means there's not community happening. There's a show happening. And we're not here to put on a show. We're not here to impress Jesus or others with how we can speak eloquently, clean the lobby, sing, play guitar, whatever it is. That's not what we're here for. We're here to become a community that gathers in the name of Jesus. So just a nugget, just a thought. I know you might be an introvert. You might be a little people phobic at times. The whole pandemic thing ruined lots of people. Don't worry. We all are more socially awkward than you realize. My wife, I'm going to talk about her for just a moment. I don't know if she has given me permission on this one. I'm so sorry, babe. But she'll often say, like, I'm just the most awkward person ever. Like I'm going to talk to somebody. I just don't know what to say. And then I'm just going to be like, okay, I'm sorry, and walk away. I'm like, that's the way like 80% of the people feel. There's like that 10 to 20% who can hold a conversation with anyone. The rest of us go, how about them sports teams, huh? Yeah, did you see the thing? And it used to be easier, right? When there was like 4 TV channels and Seinfeld was the biggest TV show there was. You could be like, hey, did you see Seinfeld? That'd be great, yeah. Nowadays, like somebody threw out a thing like, oh yeah, we're all watching the World Cup. I was like, is that soccer thing? And they looked at me, I was like, I'm sorry, I'm halfway joking. But you could throw out whatever, like Stranger Things was watched by 400 billion people, and yet you'll say the word Stranger Things. Someone's like, what are you talking about? I've never heard that, right? Like, we're all divided into our little subculture. So if nothing else, let me just give you permission to be awkward. If you need it, here, I will open up my heart and share in all honest to goodness. I find it immensely easier to talk to a crowd than to a single person. Immensely. If somebody said, hey, we need you to go talk to 10,000 people, I'd be like, okay, sounds good. But like God says, hey, go talk to that one person. I'm like, so, you like food? I like food. And then that topic wears out in about a minute, and I'm like, crap, that was my best line. Oh, what do I do? You know, one of my favorite persons in the planet, my buddy David growing up, he was the anti-awkward patrol guy. He would just talk to anybody. And I knew that it was working because anybody could have a conversation with him. And you know what his favorite pickup line for girls was? My toothbrush is blue. What color's yours? Because it was so disarming. It'd be like, what? And if they went down that conversational rabbit hole, it's like, well, I just talked to you about a toothbrush. I can talk to you about anything else now, and it's better than that, right? We don't know how to have community naturally, and yet all of us want it. So prior to the pandemic, there was this huge study done. Dr. Bill Senior talks about it in his Take Heart YZ book that we've either talked about or are going to talk about. I'm out of place in my brain here, but either way, this study was done, and prior to the pandemics, they were already about to call an alarm on a social or societal pandemic for 5 things that were going on. You've heard me say it before, but suicide ideation, isolation, loneliness, depression, marital disharmony, and addiction. So I combined 2, isolation and loneliness are one. But loneliness and isolation is almost universal right now. And yet God wired us for community. So part of our faith journey as we grow together, not just devote ourselves to the apostles' teaching, but let's talk, let's get some people who do a 5 a.m. Bible study with 3 or 4 guys. That's one of the ways I was deepest shaped in my faith, was our youth worship leader was like, hey, we're going to meet at Perkins at 5 a.m. every Wednesday. And I was like, I hate you. I'll be there. Right? But I got Sean. It was 3 of us. Sean, myself, and Tim. We got together. We talked about God. We talked about our life for 45 minutes because then we had to get ready for work, right? Every Wednesday morning. It changed my faith, right? So committing to a gathering. Now, I'm speaking to those who have committed to be in this group for a year and you've been here. Note who isn't. Call them. I need to do it too, don't get me wrong. But we're a community, not a classroom in the sense that you're getting credit for this. Note who's not here. Talk to them. Say, hey, I missed you. Not because you're trying to guilt them, but because we genuinely care. Gather together. When this group experience ends in a year, I'm going to look at what to do for the next year and things like that. But ideally, this isn't the first, last, and only time you tried being in community and having conversation. Hopefully this is a kickstart to it. So that's the conversation on that piece. Good. I did this just about the right amount of timing. Perfect. Page 180 then, the next piece of this is serving. Serving. So there was a great study that was done that said, as a church leader, I'm giving you behind the scenes, in the modern world, this was 20 years ago, which means that this is far worse than what I'm about to say. You can only be able to expect no more than 3 things from your people in an average week. So if someone is a deeply committed a part of your church, what are the 3 things that you would want them doing if you said, hey, this and only this, everything else has to go? And almost every study since has shown that outside of personal devotional Bible study, the church portion of your side of things, Sunday morning, some sort of a group conversation, and serving. Those 3 things tend to lead to greater discipleship. Now we're going to talk about personal devotional Bible study as the pinnacle actually in these studies, but in terms of the communal experience, that is what they look at. So when we talk about the Vision series coming up in August, we're going to talk about that more like Jesus piece. And if you notice, I've started kind of breaking it down here and there, but that word like is actually our discipleship process. It's live surrendered to live generously, which is the attitude we're working towards. Invite God's presence, which is one of the ways we kind of shorthand to say, hey, like make Sunday mornings about being in God's presence, about being in the gathering of the church. Keep growing, which is the discipleship aspect, but it happens best in community. And then experience transformation, which happens through serving. So like if I had nothing else that I could ever, see you guys be a part of in there, I would say if you could build something like that into a rhythm, and 2 of them can happen together because you can serve on Sundays, you can do things like that. But serving is where we move, and notice how this fits with what we've been talking about from discipleship, from our head, because Rose, you're listening, you're mostly here, to circles, you start getting a lot more here, to high fives. You start going from your head to your hands, or from head to your heart to your hands. That's what it means to follow Jesus. So serving is a big part of that. So I have this nice little graphic here. It's pre-AI and I really even knew what I was doing. But I made that a few years ago, and I just haven't taken the time to make it better. So that's me with very poor word art. describing something that really helps understand when you have those moments of like, oh, I was made for this. Like, oh, this clicks. So if you notice in the center there, which is not a shape, it's kind of square-ish, diamond-ish, but it also has rounded corners, and then it's kind of got like spires sticking out of it. So that's the amoeba of purpose right there, is what that is. So the amoeba of purpose at the center of it has purpose. Like that's what we're looking for in life, right? We want to make a difference. We want our lives to matter. And then you've got these Venn diagrams that aren't good Venn diagrams because they're also weird shapes. They're kind of hot dogs. And they go in X's instead of but you've seen it like, 3 overlapping circles as a Venn diagram. I just needed to do it with 4, and that's what it looked like. So there you go. Or I could just use AI in the future. Yeah, there you go. This is what non-AI looks like. There you go. So if you look at it, there's this overlap between calling, passion, mission, and ministry. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's just a tool. It's not meant to be, something that we dive into for the next 6 hours. But somewhere between your calling and your passion, that's the thing that you're good at. If you look at your passion where you're like, oh man, and then you're like, I feel called to this. Usually that's like where you're like, oh, I'm kind of good at this. I could do this thing. Somewhere between your passion and your mission is the thing that you enjoy. It's that mission, it's that purpose, it's that thing where you're like, oh man, I'm all in for this, and it's a worthy cause. I enjoy it. Somewhere between your mission and your ministry is the thing the world needs. That's the thing where you're like, man, if my life did this and it made this better, this would be what everyone looks back on me for and goes, oh, they did that thing. That's what this is talking about. And then between your calling and your ministry, that's the thing that God's pleased with. I don't know if you know this, but in the scriptures, when Jesus is talking about the final reward, when he's talking about going to heaven and seeing Jesus face to face, he says there's going to be these people that God looks at and says, well done, my good and faithful servant. Well done. That's what this is talking about. God's pleased with it. It's that calling that he's given you, and you turn it into a ministry. And the ministry doesn't have to be, doing the coffee on Sunday morning, but it can be. It doesn't have to be speaking from stages, but it can be. It could be, going out and seeing a need in the community and going, that's my mission. And I'm going to do it in Jesus' name. So therefore, it's also part of my ministry. And so where these overlap, you're good at it, you enjoy it, the world needs it, and God's pleased with it. That's the amoeba of purpose, where you have that moment where you're like, I would die for this. I would give my life for this. And that's part of, when we talk about serving, what I'm hoping to see more of. It's not just that we need people serving in kids ministry, which, by the way, we could use some people serving in kids ministry all the time, anytime, right? But it's also about this idea that if you look at this little weird non-AI diagram, there's something, or maybe some things, that you're good at, and it's okay to say you're good at that thing. Like some people are like, oh, I'm not, it's just, I don't want to take anything away. God's, like, you're good at that thing. There are people who can't sling a wrench the way you sling a wrench. There are people who can't sing the way you sing. There are people who can't flip a hamburger the way you flip a hamburger. There are people who can't, you name it, right? Like I will never be shy about the things I'm not good at. If I start singing from stage, something went wrong. I will put YouTube on before we do that, right? If you asked me to do advanced mathematics in any shape or form, I'm going to stare at you and go, let me introduce you to my son, actually. And yet, if I ask my son to write a paper, it takes him hours and hours and hours, where I could sit down and write something like this in a couple days. I'm not saying it'd be great. I'm just saying I could do it. I could write the manual on how to fix your car. I couldn't even touch a spark plug or a whatever those things are called, right? So you are good at it. Stop apologizing for that. You're good at it. Then there's things you're good at, but you just don't enjoy, right? Let's be honest. There's those things where people come to you and like, I know you're really good at this. And you're like, I am. What do you need? That's probably not your purpose. It could be. Maybe God's working on you, but that's probably not it, right? But there are things where people come to you like, hey, you're really good at data reconfiguration, aren't you? And you're like, why, yes, I am. Do you have a spreadsheet that needs working on? Because I am the person for you, right? You're needed in this world. Then there's the things the world needs. And let's be honest, for every time we think we've figured it out, and AI is a great resource. We talk about it in my work all the time because we're required to use it as much as possible. But AI is a great resource. It's going to be a world-changing thing for a lot of things. There's a lot of things it can't do that this world needs. There are some of you, when I said that thing right there is not AI, you were like, good. I like it more because of that. Right? Right? There are things this world needs. The world needs a hug. The world needs people sitting, sipping sweet tea on their porch. But there's also just things where, like, even the simplest act of someone walking through this front door of the church and you smiling, going, I'm so glad you're here today. And somebody else goes, oh, good Lord, they actually recognize I exist. We have had visitors who, one of them pulled me aside and talked to me about it. She said, hey, I just want you to know you passed the test. I was like, great, what does that mean? She's like, I've been at churches. I'm not dogging on other churches and saying we're great. I'm just saying this happened. I've been at other churches where I walked in the door, I spent an hour and a half there, I walked out, and not a single person talked to me. Your world needs it. Might just be for you to go, hey, I see you. It might just be a listening ear. How many times have you just had someone call you, say, hey, I just need to talk. You got a sec? The world needs that. And then there's the God is pleased with it piece. I'm going to spoil some things for you. Not everything you do, God is pleased with. Okay? Yeah, there's certain things that God has said, this is not, and it's not even in the realm of my heart. And then there are certain things where, yes, God is ultimately pleased with that, but he said, not right now. And you said, well, but I'm good at it. So I'm going to take that advice you gave God, and I'm taking it under consideration while you're already filling out the form, right? But there's a lot of stuff that God's really pleased with. There are things that you do every day that God smiles because he created you to do that thing. He gave you a gift for that. And it can be anything from the singing to you're the person who's really good with spreadsheets. When you do that thing, God goes, attaboy, attagirl. I made you for that. And oftentimes, you don't even know he's saying it because we don't take time to listen. But God is going, yeah, the way you stopped for a second and picked up that piece of trash, I appreciate your heart in that. The way you had a conversation with that person, even though you didn't want to, but you gave them just that little bit of listening ear, I'm proud of that. You took that class, you took that whatever it is, that I prompted you to do, I'm proud of that. And when all those things come together, you're good at it, you enjoy it, the world needs it, and God is pleased with it, that's your purpose. That's the thing where you go, this is why I'm here. And I get that as I say this, the enemy's already sowing shame and discord in your head and saying, oh, but you don't have any of that. Because he's sowing bad seeds. Because he's afraid of what happens when you come alive to what God wants to do in your life. If you hear a voice that sounds like condemnation, it's not Jesus. Jesus sounds like conviction, yes. So I'm not saying that it's always the rainbows and flowers and whatevers. There might be conviction. That could be Jesus. But if it's condemnation, that's the enemy going, ooh, gosh, they're getting too close to the fire. Let's not let that happen. Because when you come alive to what God's doing in your life, even a little bit, the world needs it. It changes things. You enjoy it. And God's pleased with it. It changes the world. So, God placed us each here with a purpose. And part of the role of the gathering of the church is to help you discover that purpose, develop that purpose, and use those gifts. That's part of what church is supposed to be. Not so that you come to serve out of obligation because, the church just needs somebody to be doing that. Yeah, we do. But are you doing it out of discipline, duty, or delight? All those are okay. But when you get to delight, that's where somebody goes, oh man, I dropped my kid off at kids ministry today, and they just would not stop talking about how much fun they had. If I go back to kids ministry, they're going to go, thank you for watching my kid. You're a very responsible adult. That's needed, right? But there are things that you can do in the life of the church where you discover your gifts. And here's the thing, if you haven't yet, if you are serving, but you're like, I'm just doing this, whatever, maybe it means there's something you need to be doing different. Maybe it's time to free you up to say, hey, we could use you at the front door as being a greeter. Or maybe you're a behind-the-scenes person and all you really want to do is be the tech person who doesn't have to see another living soul. Again, community, but still, at least you're helping with that, right? It's part of it. So how do we discover our purpose? Well, there's a number of different ways, but at altitude.church/next, have you heard me say this before? We have this booklet that's called the Next Steps booklet. It's right there. And actually, what it's designed around is first for you to discover who the church is and what our purpose in life is and all that kind of stuff. But then the latter part of it is 3 different resources. And that's all they are. They're resources that help you more deeply understand how God wired you. One of them is the DISC. One of them is the Enneagram. And one of them is your spiritual gifts test. None of them are sacred. None of them are inherently evil. They're literally just tests in the sense that not you pass, you fail, but they show what's there. Kind of like we talked about on Sunday, the refiner's fire, right? And in those, you might find that, man, actually, I have the spiritual gift of mercy. By the way, I don't have the spiritual gift of mercy. I've had to work on that. I'm not quite like my beloved Dr. Sanders, who we nicknamed Captain Compassion because, somebody came up to him one time and was like, oh, my dog died and my grandma is having a heart attack and this is going on. He's like, your homework was due yesterday. Like, I'm not quite, and he did it. He was just a great BS detector. So it wasn't that it was like, but I'm closer. I have to adapt to get to mercy. Some of you, you'll find that and you're like, oh my gosh, you know what we need? We've got somebody who's in the hospital with his wife right now. And while Chandra and I have reached out, if somebody else reached out and said, hey, I'm going to come by and bring you a hot dog. Oh my gosh, really? That's incredible. You might have the gift of mercy. You might have the gift of helps. Helps just literally means you come alive when you're like, somebody needs something. I'm there. Now, there's a downside to all of these as well, obviously. So I would encourage you to go through that Next Steps booklet if you haven't, or if you haven't in a while, because it might actually help you figure out who this person is. It's not going to give you all the answers. It's not magic. It's pieces of that intricate puzzle that God has created with you to where you might go, this says I have the gift of worship. I do like singing in the shower. I wonder if I should. By the way, worship isn't only singing, but it also defines those things. So I'm pointing you to a resource that I want to encourage you to use. Next week, we are going to have no video, by the way, next week. We're going to have group. Bob is going to be leading it. We're going to be doing something a little bit separate for there. But starting the next week, I not only highly encourage you to come, but I also highly encourage you to invite somebody who hasn't been here yet. Because we're actually, Bob's about to give you one of these, going to sidetrack for about 3 or 4 weeks into a completely different booklet. I know. You're like, that's so awesome, right? This is called Finding Your Place in God's Story. Because speaking of inventories and how God wired me, quick spoiler for what we're going to talk about is, did you know, right now, downloads and purchases of the Bible are at all-time increases of up, high. However, one of the most common things that they're seeing in the trends is people saying, yes, I was told I should read this book. No one's ever shown me how. And when you start reading the Bible, Genesis goes by and you're like, oh, these are some great stories. I can't believe that happened. Exodus, you're like, oh, this is wild. Leviticus, you're like, like why are we talking about skin diseases and whether I should burn my house down because there's mildew in it? And then you get to Numbers, and and so nobody has ever told them, like, hey, actually start, like, you know how every other book you read, you start here? Start here. Yeah. And they're like, that's weird. Oh, and by the way, even this one, there's going to be this whole long section where it's like, this dude begat that person, begat that. Skip it. Come back to it later. Like, there's so much in this book that people just have no idea. So what we're going to do for the next few weeks is we're going to talk about how to do a daily devotional time using the 3 questions and dig into 4 different Bible study methods that are wired around, or that are based around how the 4 different learning styles work. There are 4 learning styles that God has wired into humanity, and you're a combination of a couple of those. Most likely, people have told you to read the Bible in a way that does not resonate with your learning style. And so you've done it out of obligation, maybe, but you've never done it out of delight. So we're going to dig into that. So Bob's going to give you one of these. We're going to look at it in 2 weeks, but for those who need to read ahead and know what's coming, here it is. It has all of it in there. I will warn you, this opens up to the very center to the inductive Bible study method, which is the way I learn. I will pre-forewarn you that you can use that method and dig into it deep. My inductive Bible study final for Dr. Sanders when I was in my senior year of college was based around 4 verses of Scripture, and it was 21 pages. You don't have to do that if that's not your style. But I'm going to give you the resources so you can. I'm also going to give you the resources to be super reflective or super action-oriented or super storytelling-oriented. So that's coming up in 2 weeks. Nothing next week for you guys. Don't worry on that side. So